Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Billy, for the introduction. And I just want to say it's been a privilege to be invited to speak here today. This is my first invitation at a speaking engagement. So pretty exciting that it's at the World Class Business Leader Conference. Yeah, just to give you some context, uh, I've seen some disclaimers at the beginning of presentations, and so I thought I would give some to mine. And that was putting together this presentation has actually been incredibly difficult for me, and that's because framed a certain way, I think the thing that I'm calling out is actually pretty massive, which is the collapse of many integrated systems for which life depends on. Collapse of systems which without proper resiliency infrastructure could result in the death of millions and possibly billions of people worldwide. Because of this, I think it's important for us to have an honest conversation. I know it's going to be uncomfortable to acknowledge some of the ways in which we have failed, not only as a society to address some of these problems, but also how corporations, governments, and institutions have as well. Before I go through my presentation and present to you my observations as to the growing resiliency deficit, I just want to give you some context as to how I got here. I am a researcher and a scientist at heart. For most of my undergrad career, actually, I studied molecular and cellular biology, also with communication of science, where I was studying the toxicology or the endocrinological effects of toxic chemicals within public waterways. But I quickly realized that science research, research specifically in a lab where I'm calibrating pipettes all day, actually is very far from the gap where impact can be made. And I discovered corporate sustainability, which has access to the most amount of capital and, in my opinion, therefore has the greatest opportunity for impact. The way that I approach my job, my research has always been through the observation of systems, the standardization of a through line, and then the synthesis and presentation and hopefully actions of those observations. I've broken this presentation up into 4 parts. I will first start by defining what resiliency infrastructure is, as the evidence of this erosion will be made clear in the first 2 sections. Then I will move on to the real-world implications of these erosions and where we as sustainability professionals can take leadership in stepping up to address some of the depletion. Part 1, the erosion of resiliency infrastructure. So I have defined resiliency infrastructure to be the integrated sets of scientific, institutional, legal, and civic systems through which communities are able to adequately predict, prepare to absorb, and ultimately protect the conditions necessary for life. I have also mapped, similarly, the erosion of these systems throughout this presentation. So we'll start first with the scientific erosion of resiliency infrastructure. If we look back to February of 2025, you might have recalled massive workforce cuts occurring simultaneously across multiple agencies. Of those include 400 environmental professional EPA employees. Excuse me, just moving on. Included in those were 400 EPA employees who were terminated by executive order. By the end of last year, 33% of the positions within the EPA's agency were vacant. Of its approximately 1,500 scientists, 1,115 were let go. This included biologists, toxicologists, chemists, meteorologists, and this functionally dissolved the EPA's Office of Research and Development, which had existed since the 1970s. 13 days later, 880 National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration employees were also terminated. This included positions like hurricane hunters, meteorologists, and radar specialists. By July of that year, approximately 40% of the National Weather Forecast offices reported, quote, significant vacancies. And we'll come back to some of the real world implications of these vacancies later, but moving on to 2026, in April, we saw the White House fired by boilerplate email all 22 members of the National Science Foundation's National Science Board. If you aren't familiar, the National Science Foundation is the primary agency responsible for providing funding for basic scientific research. The NSF has been without a permanent director since May of 2025, and since then they've seen a 30% reduction in their workforce capacity, and they're currently operating at a 20% grant rate compared against their historical grant rate, which means there's been an 80% reduction in the science that is being funded. And this isn't just climate and weather prediction science, this is also science like climate research or like cancer research. We can also track the erosion of resiliency infrastructure by looking at the deletion of scientific data on federal websites. Beginning January of 2025, federal agencies began removing scientific data from public websites. Just 2 weeks after inauguration, more than 8,000 pages were taken down or modified, and 3,000 data sets across more than 24 agencies were deleted. Climate change, as a quote, was removed from the EPA's list of environmental topics. EJ Screen, the EPA's environmental justice mapping tool used by researchers, communities, and corporations to assess environmental risk exposure, was taken down. In April of 2025, the EPA removed its risk management program, a public data tool that allowed any community to search their zip code for facilities storing hazardous chemicals above their federally regulated levels and to map their accident history. A not so fun fact about the United States is a hazardous chemical incident occurs approximately 5 times a week. You would think you would want access to where that is happening. That same month, the 400 scientists contracted to produce the 6th National Climate Assessment were told their services would no longer be needed. The existing national climate assessments, congressionally mandated since 1990 and peer-reviewed by the National Academy of Science, used by every state and local government for climate risk planning, was taken offline. The 6th climate assessment, set to be published in May of 2025, was never released. In September of 2025, the USDA terminated its Household Food Security Report, the annual survey tracking hunger in America that ran continuously since 1995. And the National Oceanics, or the NOAA's billion-dollar weather and climate disaster database, the primary federal source for quantifying the financial cost of extreme weather events, stopped being updated. The agencies that produce scientific data also depend on a public layer to translate that data, to make it legible to community members, policymakers, and markets what's going on with science. That layer has been eroding simultaneously. Following a troubling trend in public science communication, National Geographic laid off its remaining staff writers. Popular Science closed down. By the end of 2025, more than 2,200 journalists' positions had been dissolved across U.S. news organizations. And Allen Media Group, one of the largest local television networks in the country, completely eliminated or replaced meteorologists at their stations in January 2025 alone. And they weren't replaced with other meteorologists. They were replaced with pre-recorded feeds from a centralized hub in Atlanta. These feeds being broadcast out to cities in Massachusetts and all the way to Hawaii. Just to make it clear, local weather knowledge is not interchangeable with centralized content. For the networks that did survive, editorial independence did not. In early 2025, the FCC approved Skydance Media's acquisition of Paramount, the parent company of CBS. David Ellison, the son of a tech billionaire, became chairman and CEO. He appointed Barry Weiss as the editor-in-chief of CBS News and installed a former Trump ambassador as the, quote, bias monitor. Bill Owens, the executive producer of CBS's 60 Minutes, resigned, and in his words, because of the quote, loss of journalistic independence due to increased unprecedented supervision by parent company Paramount. David Ellison is now also pursuing the acquisition of Warner Bros. Media and Discovery, which would add CNN to this portfolio. The infrastructure that translated environmental and scientific data for public audiences is now being reduced not only in quantity, but consolidated under editorial control aligned with the same administration responsible for deleting that data. We can also look and track the erosion of resiliency capacity through the legal capture of systems. We can look at three recent examples, and the first one is pretty personal to me, as studying Monsanto is actually what got me interested in sustainability. But in February of this year, Donald Trump signed an executive order under the Defense Production Act declaring glyphosate, the main chemical in the fertilizer Roundup, as a national defense priority. This gave conferring immunity from liability to Monsanto, the sole domestic producer of glyphosate. 6 weeks later, the Department of Justice sent a lawyer to the Supreme Court to argue alongside Monsanto that EPA approval of glyphosate should shield the company from all state-level cancer liabilities lawsuits nationwide. This ruling is actually expected this July, so it's just something to keep an eye out for. Also, in February, the NAACP sent notice of intent to sue Elon Musk's XAI data center in South Haven, Mississippi. Why? For illegally operating 27 gas turbines without a permit near homes, schools, churches, communities. The lawsuit was filed in April. Elon Musk responded by adding 6 more turbines. In June, the DOJ intervened to dismiss the case, again citing national security. Or perhaps you've seen the recent interview with OpenAI's Sam Altman, where he said that the building at the groundbreaking of a new data center, this could be used to help cure cancer. Well, what wasn't talked about in that interview was how the board where that data center was being built, Saline Township, Michigan, voted 4-1 to deny that 21 million square foot data center on prime farmland. The developer sued 2 days later. By October, a consent judgment was signed, and both the township's attorneys told officials that they were going to lose. They were going to lose this lawsuit. Why? Because, quote, municipalities can't just say they don't want them here, referring to data centers. In each of these cases, the law was present, but it acted against the people it was meant to serve. So what do you do when scientific systems are eroding, legal systems are eroding? You turn to civic organizing, which is what makes the criminalization of environmentalism incredibly terrifying. To provide some context, I need to first introduce to you an order called NSPM7, Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. And I have some screenshots pulled from this NSPM7 that we'll review here in just a second. This executive order or presidential memorandum directs the FBI, the DOJ, and the IRS to investigate and prosecute entities displaying indicators of extremism, including anti-capitalism and anti-Americanism, whatever that means. This is also concerning when you hear the rhetorics of these billionaire tech CEO billionaires who have helped architect this administration, like Peter Thiel, who has described climate activists as, quote, the legionnaires of the Antichrist. In March of 2026, when Donald Trump was delivering his 2026-2027 energy plan, he said, quote, the environmentalists, they are terrorists. I call them the environmental terrorists. This is not just rhetoric. In May of 2026, just a few weeks ago, Wired published a FOIA investigation based on more than 1,000 pages of unpublished reports from the DHS and the FBI, in which documents revealed that there's been a coordinated national shift in a newly designated domestic terrorism threat category called anti-technology extremist. This is primarily directed towards data center oppositionists. So it looks pretty small here. I actually don't even think you can read it at all, but I'll share the slides with you afterwards because I do think it's important for you to be able to read these and see these things yourself. But just for some context to really call out, under the Donald Trump's new counterterrorism strategy up here in the top corner, right underneath his signature, you can see I've highlighted it. His response to these terroristic threats is, "We will find you and we will kill you." I don't think this is just rhetoric, and I think when environmentalists are being designated now as terrorists and being called terrorists by the President of the United States, this is something that we should, as a group, take serious. I'll just skip through. This is that Wired report. You can actually see this a little bit better. In the documents obtained by Wired from the New York Intelligence and Counterterrorism Bureau, a report that warns of widespread upheaval in response to AI adoption purports to be an emerging extremism threat. Activities that they flagged, these fusion centers flagged as extremist threats were expressed or implied threat, observation or surveillance. So if you are observing these data centers, you are an extremist, according to this administration, and photography. And where are they tracking these extremist groups? Well, they're keeping tabs on them at in-person assemblies, community board meetings, school board meetings. The erosion of these systems are not occurring in parallel. They are interdependent, and the erosion of resiliency capacity in one has a multiplicative effect across all the others. When scientific capacity that feeds institutional capacity fails, you can't prepare for what you can't measure. When legal accountability depends on the scientific record as its evidence base, you no longer have evidence to hold people accountable. Civic organizing is what activates all three of these other systems when they fail. When you erode one, you degrade the other, and that erosion has real-world costs. The flash floods in Kerr County, Texas in July of last year give us a clear look at what it costs to enter a systemic shock, such as a natural disaster, with depleted resiliency infrastructure. On July 4th of 2025, you may remember the Kerr County flooding, where the Guadalupe River in Kerr County, Texas, the most flash flood-prone region in the country, rose 26 feet in 45 minutes. 139 people died. 28 of them were children at a summer camp, Camp Mystic Summer Camp. Recall what I showed you or just told you about those workforce cuts in February. This is only a few months later now in July. From those 880 NOAA employees that were terminated, among them included the warning coordination meteorologist and the senior hydrologist who specialized in flooding events. Both of these vacancies served Kerr County where this flooding took place, and both of these positions had been vacant since February when these workforce cuts were made. Kerr County is not an anomaly. In fact, the way that I see it, Kerr County will be a case study for what it looks like when we enter into systemic shock without the necessary resiliency infrastructure. On top of that, the United States is dangerously thirsty right now. After one of the hottest and driest winters on record, we have seen right now, this month, a 72% of the continental United States is in a drought. 50% of the country is in severe or worse conditions. Cities are telling their residents to cut their water usage. Farmers are abandoning their crops, and local officials are asking how much water is left for the millions upon millions who need it. Right now, the winter snow should be melting, but that snow never came. River basins have 10% of their normal snow, and some have none at all. The Colorado River, the lifeline for 40 million Americans, is expected to deliver just 13% of its normal flow this year. In places like Kearney, Arizona, the mayor is warning residents that they could run out of water by July, this month, next month. Run out! Telling folks to try and take family showers, to wear your clothes 3 times, leave your cars dirty, don't water your lawns. Fire season is here, and a dry forest or mountainside is a field for kindling, all of it waiting for a single spark. In fact, it has already been the worst year on record for wildfires. According to a new report, nearly 2.5 million acres have burned nationwide, and it's only June. This is double the previous 10-year average. And into all of this, an El Nino is arriving. As of May 19th, the IRI assigns a 98% possibility to El Nino conditions through 2026 and into 2027. The subsurface heat reservoir in the Central Eastern Pacific is more than double what it was when we entered an El Nino event in 2023 and 2024. The World Meteorology Organization, WMO, General Secretary said, we need to prepare for a potentially strong El Nino event, which will exacerbate drought and heavy rainfall and increase the risk of heat wave both on land and in ocean. The key message in this report, just put out on June 2nd, the last key message from the WMO is, it's the time for informed decision-making. Planning and preparedness is now. But the agencies responsible for that preparedness, as I just demonstrated, have been eroded. This is where we come in. I also have to acknowledge that all of what I just said is arriving into similar converging risks. In February of 2026, US and Israeli airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites disrupted the Strait of Hormuz. Agricultural, chemicals, fertilizers, and energy, all of these will be disrupted, and they will have delayed disruptions, meaning we will see the implications of these most likely at the same time we are peaking El Nino conditions. Drought-driven crop failures are accumulating across the US and globally. The high plains, which produce a quarter of the US cropland and the majority of US wheat, is sitting in the deepest drought belt on the map that I just showed you. El Nino will exacerbate all of this, and the 2027 White House budget proposes to deepen this depletion. The EPA has been proposed to be cut an additional 52% down from the 2026 fiscal year. The NOAA eliminated completely. The Hospital Preparedness Program, the only federal program supporting healthcare systems for all natural event disasters, eliminated. LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program that keeps households from dying in extreme heat and cold, eliminated. The Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds proposed to be cut an additional 90%. These are the funds that states and cities can access to build and invest in their water infrastructure. This paints a clear picture of several converging systemic risks arriving with near certainty into a system that has been functionally stripped of its resiliency capacity. There is, however, one function. Oh no. There is, however, one function still producing credible environmental signals. This room. Us, sustainability professionals. So I've gone over all of these cuts, but what remains is ESG reporting, materiality assessment, climate risk disclosure, third-party verifications. These functions still remain. When an investor needs to know whether a portfolio company's environmental claims hold, or a board needs to understand climate exposure in their supply chain, or a community needs to know whether a development project poses a risk, Sustainability professionals provide the signal. This is why we need to expand the boundaries of our existing measurement systems. Carbon has become the dominant metric of sustainability success. But I like to say an organic cigarette can still give you cancer. A project can be carbon neutral while depleting a drought-stressed aquifer, displacing prime farmland, or by eliminating community legal resources, and they will still be called sustainable. The circumstances we are in now demand a reorientation around a new definition of sustainability success. I understand employer direction, ROI justification, and the pressure to defend the function of sustainability in financial terms. These are real constraints, but they are not creating a sufficient enough ceiling. What we certify as sustainability professionals is what gets built, which means we must challenge the constraints of the current system as the limit of our professional responsibility. We have responsibilities as agents of legitimization. We are the remaining credible signal in a vacancy of accountability. The star on this diagram is us. Sustainability professionals sit at the intersection of every system that I just explained has been eroded. What standard we are operating to is not an abstract professional question. The practices we legitimize and the science we communicate contribute directly to the erosion or rebuilding of these resiliency infrastructure. And we must operate with the seriousness that responsibility requires. Which is why I'm calling for the convening of a working group beyond the roundtable discussion of today and toward the establishment of a professional standard. This is not a novel idea. In fact, every profession with an ethical responsibility to serve people before companies have one. Doctors have medical boards, lawyers have the bar, and accountants have the CPA. These institutions exist because the stakes of getting it wrong are too high to leave employer discretion alone, and sustainability is no different. Among its priorities, the working group should look to establish 3 things. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go over them, but the main being a defined fiduciary standard, and the standard being the preservation of life and the systems necessary for the continuation of life. I will speak more about this in the working group, but if I had to leave everyone with just one thing, it's one that hope is a verb, hope is an action. It is something we do in order to have belief. And so we have to take action together to try and do what governments, institutions, and industries are currently failing to do. And my start of a solution, if you're not joining the roundtable discussion, is to take intentional time off of work. And I mean this very seriously. Take time off work to spend time with your families, outside, and in your communities. Because this is the most difficult way for us to create cognitive dissonance away from our responsibility as sustainability professionals and as people and agents of our community. Thank you.